Okay, let's get to our panel. Joining us here in Washington is veteran South African journalist Simon Barber. Roger Southall is an Emeritus Professor in Sociology at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. He joins us via Skype. Kenneth Mwenda is a law professor at the University of Pretoria. He's with us here in our studio in Washington. And also with us is Nhlanhla Sehume. He covers South African politics as a journalist and radio news anchor in Johannesburg. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Kenneth, let me start with you. Sure. We just heard Ambassador Rasool tell us there that Jacob Zuma has brought the ANC into disrepute. He said he has damaged the ANC. So why has it been so difficult for the party to get rid of him?
I think what we've seen in the region, especially South Africa, is this notion of populist leaders. Jacob Zuma has a huge constituency, or has had a huge constituency, which has declined in the recent years. And that's been very appealing. We saw that even in Zimbabwe, how Mugabe for a long time was able to hold on. And the credentials that speak to him are mainly the anti-apartheid credentials. But you can't hold on to those credentials for long. The political culture in South Africa now is not so much about apartheid. It's about class struggle now. There is the issue of class structure. And so the landscape is changing, and we have to face reality. The time of the old anti-apartheid music is over. We have to dance to a different tone now. So really, that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, let me go to Roger Southall. He is in Johannesburg. And Roger, what are the political risks for the ANC in granting some kind of immunity to Jacob Zuma, or even a pardon if he's convicted?
Well, I think the initial thing I think we have to recall is that I don't think the ANC has any legal capacity to grant Jacob Zuma immunity. That in fact, I think that he has to be prosecuted, and then conceivably he could be granted a pardon. I think the danger for the ANC in the short term is that any suggestion that he will get a pardon will damage them electorally. I think there are a lot of people who will say, as a quote you said from Adam Habib, that you should not be allowed to loot the state without some form of punishment. And I think that would harm the ANC electorally very much indeed. In the longer term, past the election, I think the ANC would be able to give Jacob Zuma some form of pardon after he'd been convicted. But I don't think that legally they can give him immunity just now.
Simon, if we look at this politically, the ANC has known for a very long time that, or they've known of President Zuma's behavior, but it's taken them a really long time to act on it.
Well, I think you have an interesting dynamic in South Africa, where it's been alluded to before, is that the guy in charge, the president, has an enormous amount of patronage, and it's very difficult to get people to change their allegiance if they don't know who's going to be feeding them next. One of the most fascinating studies I've seen about South Africa looks at the way income is distributed. And if you are, remember, we've had this growing black middle class as a result of the end of apartheid, but this is largely a middle class that has been created by government and government jobs. Now, if you have that government job, or a recipient of that government patronage, you're going to live in a middle class lifestyle. If you lose that, you're back in a shack. So people are very nervous about changing their allegiances. And it's actually, this is another reason why you're seeing quite a lot of violence, political violence, over small jobs out in the countryside.
Okay, let's bring in Nhlanhla Sehume. He's in Johannesburg as well. Nhlanhla, this must be a frustrating week for the media in South Africa. You had meetings that were scheduled, then they were postponed. Rumors that Zuma would in fact fire Cyril Ramaphosa, then that was denied. Is there any more clarity about what's going on there?
Well, for now, there are more questions than answers, with different messages coming from the ANC. I guess the most clear indication that there is a move to remove Zuma or recall Zuma came from the party's Treasurer General, who basically told the investors that, look, the ANC, or the National Working Committee of the ANC, wants Zuma out, saying that they met, or the top six leadership of the ANC met with Zuma on Sunday to discuss what they termed a transition or handing over of power from Zuma to his deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa. But The response he says they got was one where Zuma told them to go back to structures of the ANC and basically dared them to fire him, saying he sees nothing wrong that he has done. Also saying to the top six that, look, what is this term you refer to as transition, seemingly not wanting to understand what their demands are. So he's basically put the ball back in their court to say that, look, I dare you to fire me, basically. So now I guess it's a waiting game to see how these talks between Zuma and his deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, are going to go.
Kenneth, to the point that Nhlanhla was making there have been analysts who've been saying that the fact that President Zuma is still in office, in fact, one analyst said that he's outfoxing Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, I mean, there are fundamentally three ways in which, he may have to step down. One, he may choose to resign on his own accord, or secondly, if there's a motion of no confidence under the Constitution. And the third is impeachment under Article 89 of the South African Constitution. Now, of the three, the one that is sort of gaining momentum is the one of impeachment, but it's a strenuous one. It's more demanding than actually a motion of no confidence, although in the past, we've seen last year, 2017, he survived a motion of no confidence. The other one, which is outside the Constitution, is for the National Executive Committee to recall President Zuma, like was the case in President Thabo Mbeki's situation. But I have my sincere doubts that that route would probably force him to step down. So that's where we are.
Simon?
Yeah, I think ANC President Ramaphosa, soon I think to be President Ramaphosa, is very, very keen to play it by the rules. South Africa needs to get back to the rule of law. The rule of law has been trashed by Zuma for the past, his term for the past 7 years. Cyril Ramaphosa is very keen to get back to that. After all, he is almost the father of the Constitution that we have now. And so I don't think you're going to see him do what the National Executive did to Mbeki, which was basically illegal. I mean, they have no power to recall the president. It's either that power rests with Parliament.
Roger, why has Cyril Ramaphosa been so careful, especially the language that he's used when he's dealing with President Zuma, saying that this is not a president that we need to humiliate, this is not someone that has to leave office in disgrace? It's almost as if he's pampering him, he's indulging him.
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier that President Zuma still has a large reservoir of support around the country. Particularly in particular parts of the country, KwaZulu-Natal, the province from which he comes. He still has a lot of supporters embedded in the state and indeed in the security apparatus in the country. So I think Cyril Ramaphosa has to tread very carefully indeed, and that he wants to keep this transition as smooth as possible. And he certainly does not want it to move out onto the streets into conflict between various supporters. And there has been some tendency towards that. Last weekend, there was a march by some Zuma supporters on the ANC's headquarters in Joburg. It didn't get a lot of dynamic, but the potential is there. So I think Cyril Ramaphosa knows that this is a very combustible situation.
Nhlanhla, what is the political opposition in Parliament saying about what's going on in the ANC? You have the main opposition, which is the Democratic Alliance, and there's a smaller but very vocal group called the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters. South Africa is scheduled to have an election next year. Did they look at this and smell blood?
Of course they did. In this case, parties like the EFF have said that they are not going to sit in Parliament and listen to a State of the Nation address having Zuma at the podium as he is an illegitimate president, whilst the DA has also come out criticizing the president for his over 700,000 corruption charges and even allegations of sexual assault that have emerged against him, and basically using it as their card to delegitimize President Zuma. They've said that, look, if Zuma does not step down, they will take to the streets and probably call for a shutdown set for Tuesday. Although details haven't emerged as yet, more details are expected as the days go on. So the opposition is adding pressure on these calls for President Zuma to resign, but they've basically put the ball back into the ANC's court to say that, look, for now we're going to use a wait-and-see approach, but the decision to have Zuma recalled shouldn't take so long. So basically saying to the ANC that if a decision does not come soon, they will add on more pressure, they will take to the streets and mobilize South Africans to act as well against President Zuma.
Simon, you mentioned earlier on the economic situation in South Africa. I mean, there's a country where there is still widespread poverty. The wealth gap is one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest in the world. Then we hear of President Zuma being captured, as it's put, in South Africa, that billions of dollars have been plundered from the state. What does that look like to the world?
Well, it's clear that the takeover by Zuma's people and the Gupta family from India, who have become his sort of backers of his family, have taken over the state-owned corporations, or at least their boards, and a lot of the public contracting, and huge amounts of money that should be going to improve the lives of people at the grassroots is just being plundered and siphoned off. I mean, that's at the core of what of the charges against. That's why Zuma they're pushing him out. Yes, unemployment in South Africa is now running well above 25%. The rand has recovered a bit because people are looking at the future coming presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa, and they've got some confidence there. But unless you can get some growth back in the economy and to increase revenues back to the state coffers, you then can't continue doing the social programs you've had. You risk real trouble, as the ambassador was saying. And we may well find ourselves having our sovereign debt rated as junk, in which case, that will lead then to a massive outflow of capital from the country. So we're at a dangerous time.
Kenneth, after this political crisis is resolved, that is, Jacob Zuma leaves office, Cyril Ramaphosa becomes the leader of the country, do you see a period of stability in South Africa?
Definitely, and I think that will sort of bring investor confidence. I think two key messages are coming through from Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. One, the fight against graft, corruption. The other one is economic growth. Currently, South Africa faces a challenge. Unemployment rates are pretty high. So those are good signals, I think, to the international community. And I think Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa has good credentials, given his track record as vice president and in the business community as well. So those are good signals to the market.
Roger, by their own admission, the ANC appears to have taken a battering. How do they regain the trust of the South African people?
Well, one of the great ironies is that the ANC, I think, is going to be running an election campaign on an anti-corruption program, whereas in fact it's the ANC which has been which has essentially been in office overseeing this corruption. But that's the irony of the situation, and I think that Cyril Ramaphosa, he comes with a clean record. Ironically, one of the things I've said about Deputy President Ramaphosa is that he's so rich that he won't need to plunder. Well, that's a rather backhanded compliment to him, but that's the sort of thing that's being said. I think the more important thing, as has been suggested, is that Cyril Ramaphosa comes with enormous credibility. And I think he can just about get away with an anti-corruption message, despite the fact that he's leading the ANC. And I think it rather puts the opposition parties in quite a fix, because their major attraction, particularly the major attraction of the economic freedom fighters, has been that they are anti-Zuma. Once Zuma disappears from the scene, that's going to give them quite a dilemma.
In Nhlanhla, there is talk of state capture, of corruption, all these allegations against Jacob Zuma, the plunder of state-owned assets. Is this being investigated right now? Who's doing the investigation?
Well, investigations are still ongoing, because remember that the High Court had declared invalid the decision to drop the charges against President Jacob Zuma. So we could soon see that case again in court, although often state agencies like the Hawks and the NPA have been criticized previously for not acting quick enough on this matter. The prosecution's boss, Sean Abrahams, has also come under a lot of fire, basically facing criticism to say that he is sitting on this case. The president, yes, is facing more than 700 charges, but nothing is being done about this. But since we've had this new presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa within the ANC, there is renewed hope that somehow the NPA and other state agencies will act on this matter, and we'll soon see Zuma in court.
Kenneth, the ANC has been in power in South Africa since those historic elections in 1994, and I'm wondering to what extent this is a turning point for the party, because if you look at Jacob Zuma, he belongs to that group of people that were a group of exiles, people who'd served time, prison time on Robben Island. But you look at Ramaphosa, he comes from a new generation, people who are inside South Africa, who conducted the anti-apartheid struggle inside South Africa. So how big a change is that?
From experience, what we've seen, if you look at countries in the region, look at, for example, Zambia, Zimbabwe to a larger extent, most of the independence political parties have lasted for about 15 to 20 years. After that, the music begins to change. You know, there's a new paradigm, it's a paradigm shift. You're no longer talking about apartheid, you're no longer talking about colonialism. Like I said, it becomes now an economic problem across races, across ethnic groups. And this is happening in South Africa. I don't see ANC staying in power for a very long time going forward. We might see some fundamental changes. Even if Ramaphosa might come to power quite all right, ANC will continue. But probably a term or two, there could be some other political probably gaining more momentum than ANC.
And of course, the other thing you have in South Africa right now is that there's a new generation of voters who've never lived under
Precisely.
apartheid.
So they don't know some of these old things of apartheid and so forth. So, you know, you have to talk to realities. And what makes the South African situation even more complex is that the president is chosen in parliament. And ANC has the majority. But to what extent will ANC hold on to that majority? We have DA, which also is gaining momentum there. So, you know, things are evolving.
We could enter the era of coalition politics, but that's where we're going to have to leave it for now. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.